In a small mountain town, one man's fight to protect his family's vineyard becomes a war against an HOA president willing to destroy everything for control. As lies spiral out of control, the truth fights back harder than anyone ever imagined. This is the story of resilience, legacy, and the power of standing your ground. Let's begin the story. The morning sun barely kissed the mist-drenched peaks of Silverstone Ridge when it all began. I stood by the weathered old sycamore tree that marked the heart of Callahan Vineyards, the very tree my great-great-grandfather had planted with his bare, calloused hands breathing in the crisp mountain air. The vineyard stretched like a green and gold quilt over the hillsides, the grapes heavy with promise after a season of hard labor. It should have been a perfect morning. It should have been sacred. That's when I saw her, Karen, charging straight up the rocky path through the vines like a mad queen, her neon pink sneakers flashing violently under cheap designer leggings, her battered clipboard swinging at her side like a weapon of righteous fury. I didn't even have time to open my mouth before she planted a crooked metal stake into the edge of the upper vineyard. Attached to it, a weather-beaten community property for sale sign that looked like it had been stolen from a flea market clearance bin. She wiped her hands dramatically, like she had just won some epic battle, then smiled at me, smiled like I was the one trespassing. For a full, stunned second, I thought maybe the high-altitude sun had gotten to me. Hallucination, a weird dream. But no, she was already whipping out her phone, snapping photos of the vineyard, the barn, even the old stone wine cellar that had stood on this land since before cars were a thing. A cold dread settled in my gut. This wasn't just another annoying HOA memo stuffed under the door. This was an attack. Before I could even set down the pruning shears in my hand, Karen stormed across the wet grass, almost slipping twice but somehow keeping her death grip on that cursed clipboard. She stopped 2 feet in front of me, puffed up like a furious pigeon, and barked, "You're in violation of the Ridgeview Community Development Regulations." I stared at her, sweaty and stunned, still gripping the shears, still half convinced this was a nightmare. She jabbed the clipboard at my chest like it was a sheriff's badge. By majority vote, Callahan Vineyards has been absorbed into the Ridgeview Homeowners Association. As acting president, I am ordering you to vacate immediately, or else, she added with a vicious grin, we'll proceed with legal acquisition. The silence that followed was so sharp it could have snapped steel wire. Finally, I said, voice low and steady, "Lady, this vineyard's been in my family since before your HOA was even a speck on a paper napkin. It's older than your plastic sneakers." Karen's eyes narrowed to furious slits. She slammed the clipboard against her hip, then with a grand flourish, unfurled a roll of caution tape from her tote bag and started wrapping my grandfather's old wine press like it was a crime scene. Watching her desecrate a century of blood, sweat, and tradition with dollar store plastic filled me with a rage so thick it tasted like iron on my tongue. This wasn't an argument. This was war. Karen didn't bother with any more conversation. She just kept wrapping caution tape across the vineyard like a lunatic setting up for a Halloween haunted house. Bright yellow lines now cut through the green rows of grapes, tangling across the trellises my father had hammered into place with his own blistered hands decades ago. It was obscene. I followed her silently, the shears still hanging loosely at my side, too stunned to speak. She barked orders to a few cronies trailing behind Ridgeview HOA zealots wearing matching t-shirts emblazoned with the words "Community First" in ugly, aggressive fonts. One of them, a smug man with sunglasses perched on his forehead, actually started hammering stakes into the earth at the vineyard's edge, posting up signs that read, "Future site of Ridgeview Community Center and Recreation Area." My jaw clenched so tight I thought I might crack a molar. The final insult came when Karen plopped down a laminated poster board onto an old wine barrel near the tasting room, a vision board filled with badly photoshopped images. They had replaced my family's vineyard with stock photos of smiling children playing soccer, a pickleball court where a grape field should be, and a pastel pink cafe called Karen's Cafe where the wine cellar currently stood. For a moment, it was almost too insane to process. It wasn't just disrespectful, it was delusional. I finally found my voice. "This land," I said slowly, the words heavy with fury, "is private property. It's zoned agricultural. It's protected. You can't just—" "Correction," Karen snapped, stepping up so close I could smell her overpowering floral perfume. "This was private property. As of the Ridgeview Board's emergency vote last night, it belongs to the community." "An emergency vote?" of people who didn't even own this land. "You're trespassing," I growled, taking a step forward. Karen flinched back instinctively but covered it with a snide smile. "I suggest you pack up your little hobby vineyard before legal action escalates," she sneered, waving her clipboard like it was a holy relic. Behind her, a few neighbors were already pulling out their phones, recording the chaos unfolding. I spotted some familiar faces, people who had once bought bottles of my family's wine at the local farmer's market. People who had toasted my father's retirement with the very grapes they were now trying to bulldoze. And they were nodding along with Karen. That realization hit harder than a punch to the gut. Karen wasn't just invading my land, she was poisoning the whole narrative, twisting the truth until even decent folks didn't know what to believe. I needed to stop this madness before it spread any further. But for now, I just stood there, burning with helpless rage, as Karen posed for the cameras, flashing a victory sign next to her vandalized future community center poster. The battle lines had been drawn, the crowd had been summoned, and in that moment, high on the cold air of Silverstone Ridge, I made a silent vow. If she wanted a war, she was going to get one, and she had no idea how deep the Callahan roots ran. The next morning, the damage was worse. I woke to the rumble of engines outside my bedroom window. Bleary-eyed, I pulled on my boots and rushed to the porch, heart pounding against my ribs like a war drum. Down at the bottom of the drive, a convoy of cars was parked along the gravel shoulder. Folding tables were already being set up, complete with Ridgeview HOA banners flapping in the chilly mountain breeze. Karen was there, of course, standing tall, or at least as tall as her neon platform sneakers would allow, next to a giant thermos labeled "Definitely Not Wine" in bubble letters. She had even brought a portable loudspeaker. Its crackling feedback screamed through the vineyards like a banshee as she announced, "Welcome, neighbors, to the Ridgeview Community Vineyard Project. Tours begin shortly." Tours. My blood went ice cold. From the end of the drive, a steady stream of people began trickling in. Some curious, some confused, all clutching colorful brochures Karen's minions handed out like candy at a parade. I grabbed one from a passing hand, scanning the absurd promises printed across the glossy pages. Future community pool, outdoor fitness park, Karen's cafe and juice bar, monthly sunset yoga in the vines. And in the very center, photoshopped right over my family's stone wine cellar, a giant inflatable slide shaped like a bottle of sparkling grape soda. I crushed the flyer in my fist. This wasn't just trespassing. Karen was actively selling a fantasy. She had stirred up just enough excitement, just enough dreamers desperate for community improvements, that people had started believing her lies, or at least pretending they did, chasing whatever false promises she dangled in front of them. One middle-aged man even pulled a measuring tape out of his back pocket, walking across my land like he was already planning the foundation for pickleball courts. I stormed down the drive, Jake, my cattle dog, sprinting at my heels, barking furiously. "Off the property," I shouted, voice breaking like thunder across the field. The man jumped, dropping his tape measure. Jake gave a warning nip to his boot heel for good measure, sending him scrambling back toward his truck. Karen saw me coming and dramatically grabbed her loudspeaker again. "Please remain calm, everyone. The previous occupant is experiencing transition anxiety. We have counseling resources available if needed," she bleated into the mic, painting me as some wild-eyed squatter clinging to a dream. It was like being trapped in a nightmare, but the worst part was seeing the hesitant looks from some of the neighbors. People who had known my family, who had drunk our wine at community festivals, who had cheered when my grandfather won a Lifetime Achievement Award at the county fair, now standing awkwardly, uncertain whether I was the villain. That twisted narrative burned hotter than any sun ever could. I realized with bone-deep clarity, if I didn't act, and soon Karen's false world would become reality simply because it was the loudest one. She wasn't just trying to steal my land. She was trying to steal the truth. By the next day, the situation had mutated from absurd to dangerous. I woke up to a low buzzing sound. For a moment, still half asleep, I thought it was just an early swarm of bees working the vineyard. But when I stumbled onto the porch, coffee in hand, I saw the truth. Drones, at least 4 of them, black and whirring like mechanical hornets, swooping low over the grape rows, the barn, even the old Callahan family cottage where my grandfather had lived until the day he died. I squinted into the morning sun and spotted Karen standing smugly at the bottom of the driveway, holding a sleek new controller like she was operating some twisted video game. Across from her, a makeshift tent had been erected, with a cheap banner reading, "Official Ridgeview Community Asset Documentation Station." More HOA members bustled around, setting up laptops, printers, and a big donation jar labeled "Save Our Vineyard Future Park Fund," already stuffed with cash and crumpled checks. It hit me like a punch to the chest. They weren't just trying to steal the vineyard anymore, they were building evidence to support their lies. Manufacturing a fake paper trail with enough noise, paperwork, and drone footage to swamp anyone who dared question it. Jake barked and snapped at the buzzing drones, his teeth flashing, his loyalty blazing hotter than ever, but even he couldn't chase away the sense of invasion curling around the edges of my mind. I grabbed my phone and started recording everything. Every swoop of the drones, every fake donation, every HOA member scribbling fake notes on official-looking clipboards. I wasn't stupid. I knew the truth alone wasn't enough, not against a machine fueled by mob delusion. That's when Karen spotted me filming. She stalked up the driveway, her sneakers kicking up dust, her face a mask of manufactured outrage. "You are unlawfully interfering with community development initiatives," she screeched, jabbing a finger at my chest. Per Ridgeview Statute 7.13, all documentation efforts are protected under emergency expansion provisions. "What statute?" I barked back. "This isn't Ridgeview property. It's Callahan land, and it has been for 130 damn years." Karen smirked, that slow, oily smirk that told me she knew something I didn't. "Not anymore," she purred, pulling out a thick sheaf of papers. "County records have been updated." My stomach dropped. Impossible. I hadn't missed any notifications. There was no rezoning, no annexation notices, no paperwork, no. Unless Karen had gotten her hooks into someone inside the county office, someone sloppy or stupid enough to falsify records or at least pretend like they had been updated. The realization hit me like a stone to the gut. This wasn't just a rogue HOA president gone wild. Karen had help, and she was moving faster than I could have imagined. If I didn't shut this madness down immediately, legally and publicly, there might come a day very soon when even the law itself would look at Callahan Vineyards and see nothing but a future swimming pool. And over my dead body was that going to happen. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table, filled with scarred from generations of family meals and hard winters, flipping through dusty files, naps, tax records, anything I could find that proved the Callahan Vineyard was ours, had always been ours. My father, Eli Callahan, joined me after a while, moving slower these days but still sharp-eyed, still carrying the stubbornness of every farmer who had ever worked this land. He read Karen's fake notices in silence, his jaw grinding so hard I thought he might crack a tooth. Finally, he tossed the papers aside and muttered, "Damn fool, woman's about to find out what happens when you pick a fight with mountain folk." That low, gruff certainty lit something inside me. We weren't helpless. Not by a damn mile. It was time to stop reacting. It was time to hit back. The first thing I did was call an old family friend, Mr. Malcolm Dandridge, a lawyer known across the county for his ferocity in land disputes. If a land grab was a fire, Dandridge was a hurricane carrying a fire hose and a flamethrower. He picked up on the first ring, listened quietly while I explained everything. When I finished, there was a long pause, and then he let out a slow, almost delighted chuckle. "Well, Luke," he drawled, "sounds like Ridgeview's about to have a very bad week." By sunrise, he was already on the road to Silverstone Ridge, his battered leather briefcase stuffed with deeds, county records, agricultural zoning statutes, and enough legal grenades to flatten Karen's entire fantasy kingdom. But even that wasn't enough. I needed to destroy not just the lies but the story Karen was selling. So I spent the next 12 hours documenting everything. I filmed the drones trespassing over my property. I photographed the fake survey stakes some HOA clown hammered into the vineyards. I recorded Karen's public speeches, every false claim, every illegal community donation solicitation. I snapped pictures of her laminated lies, flyers, posters, even the giant inflatable grape soda slide monstrosity. I even documented the corrected deed Karen had paraded around like a war trophy, complete with its glittery fake county seal. By the end of the day, I had built an arsenal of evidence so big it practically needed its own vineyard row. But I wasn't done yet. That evening, as the sun bled into the mountain ridges like spilled wine, I hung giant banners across every gate and fence post along the vineyard's edge. Private property established 1892. Trespassers will be prosecuted. Agricultural landmark protected by state and federal law. I laminated and zip-tied copies of the real deeds to every major entrance. I even nailed a giant laminated copy of the county's zoning map, the real one, to the tasting room door for anyone dumb enough to still think Karen had a leg to stand on. The next phase was simple: let Karen walk straight into a legal minefield. Every fake donation, every trespass, every false claim, it was no longer just annoying. It was evidence. It was ammunition. It was the rope she would use to hang herself. It didn't take long for Karen to push the crazy into overdrive. 2 days later, early Saturday morning, the quiet slopes of Silverstone Ridge were shattered by the sound of music blaring from giant speakers. I squinted from the front porch, coffee halfway to my lips, and nearly dropped the mug. Karen had thrown a full-blown festival. Down by the old stone wall marking the vineyard's lower boundary, she and her HOA zealots had set up a white canopy tent. Balloons in Ridgeview's colors, a nauseating mix of purple and neon green, and folding tables covered in cheap plastic tablecloths. People were milling around with plates of food, lemonade slushing in red Solo cups, and I could hardly believe it. Someone was manning a cotton candy machine. And then I saw it. In the center of it all, a giant banner fluttering in the mountain breeze, reading, "Welcome to Ridgeview Ridge Grand Reclamation Ceremony." Karen, decked out in a bright blue sash labeled Madam President, stood proudly holding an oversized pair of golden scissors. It was obvious what she intended: a ribbon-cutting ceremony, a sick, symbolic theft of my family's land. Make enough noise, gather enough witnesses, post enough photos online, and to the uninformed, it would look official. It would look real. Anger flared so hot in my chest it felt like it might burn a hole straight through my ribs. But not this time. This time, I was ready. I grabbed my folder full of evidence and headed down the drive, Jake trotting stiffly at my side, the muscles in his shoulders coiled tight with tension. As I approached, Karen spotted me and, true to form, immediately flipped on her microphone. "Attention!" she shrieked to the crowd, her voice crackling and shrill through the cheap PA system. "Be advised, the former property occupant has been asked to vacate multiple times. His presence here is purely antagonistic." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Phones came out. Cameras clicked. Good. Let them record everything. I stopped just short of the tent's boundaries, still standing firmly on my property, and held up a laminated copy of the real deed, zoning maps, and the official cease and desist letters my lawyer had prepared. "This," I said, my voice calm but cutting like a winter wind, "is Callahan land. It was Callahan land before you, your HOA, or your fantasy festival existed. And it will be Callahan land long after you're just a footnote in a court case." Karen's face twisted into a mask of fury, but before she could fire back, another sound cut through the tense silence. Sirens. Multiple. A convoy of county sheriff SUVs and a large black pickup bearing the agricultural commissioner's seal rumbled up the mountain road and screeched to a stop. Officers poured out, badges gleaming in the morning sun. For one blessed moment, the entire crowd froze. Karen, her cronies, even the guy manning the cotton candy machine, spinning pink sugar in stunned silence. The lead officer, a broad-shouldered man in mirrored sunglasses, walked straight up to Karen and without ceremony barked, "Ma'am, you're under investigation for criminal trespassing, harassment, fraudulent fundraising, and unlawful surveillance." He snapped a heavy envelope full of official charges into her manicured hands. Karen's face turned a shade of purple that matched her balloons. She opened her mouth to protest, but the officer cut her off with a crisp command. "You have the right to remain silent. I strongly suggest you use it." Across the tent, someone dropped a plate of ribs. Cameras zoomed in. Someone started recording live on Facebook. And just like that, the queen of Ridgeview's imaginary empire began to crumble in real time. Karen stumbled backward, clutching the thick envelope of charges like it was a bomb about to detonate. The lead officer motioned to 2 deputies, who moved in with slow, deliberate steps. For a second, I thought Karen might actually bolt, the way her eyes darted to the edges of the tent, the way her hands trembled around her ridiculous clipboard, but pride chained her to the spot. "I demand to speak to the mayor," she shrieked into the microphone, voice breaking with desperation. "This is community property. I have the majority vote. "You can't arrest me at a community celebration." The officer didn't flinch. He simply said, voice as cold and unyielding as stone, "You are trespassing on private agricultural land, protected under county, state, and federal law. You are under arrest." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. Karen opened her mouth again, maybe to scream, maybe to lie, but before a single word escaped, the deputies turned her around and cuffed her hands behind her back. The crowd gasped. Phones shot into the air like a forest of metal and glass, catching every humiliating second. Someone even started a slow clap that quickly built into a full-on cheer, louder and louder, echoing off the vineyard's stone walls like a celebration. Karen's face twisted in disbelief. Like a queen being dragged off her crumbling throne, she sputtered incoherently, tears brimming in her furious eyes as she struggled uselessly against the cuffs. "You can't do this. This is a public event. I have a permit," she shrieked. The officer calmly replied, "Your permit was printed from a website that sells birthday invitations. It's not worth the paper it's on." The crowd exploded in laughter. A few people even booed as Karen was marched, red-faced and screeching, past the tables of her supporters, or rather, former supporters, because in the wake of her arrest, her army evaporated like mist under a hot sun. Most of them averted their eyes, embarrassed. A few peeled off and practically ran for their cars. Only a handful of diehards remained, standing stiff and silent, and sure whether to flee or defend the indefensible. Karen, seeing her empire collapsing in real time, hurled one final insult over her shoulder. "This isn't over. I'll have my day in court. You're all going to pay. I'm a community hero." Nobody answered. Nobody believed her anymore. The officers loaded her into the back of the sheriff's cruiser. As it pulled away, the red and blue lights flashing against the vineyard's ancient stone walls, I let out a slow, deep breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Jake sat at my feet, tail thumping the ground slowly, almost like he understood. The queen was gone. But I knew better. This wasn't the end. Not yet. Karen might have been dragged away in handcuffs, but the damage she had done, the lies she had spread, were still tangled through the community like weeds choking a harvest. There were still battles left to fight. And I was just getting started. The dust had barely settled from Karen's dramatic arrest when the second wave of justice came rolling in. That very afternoon, after the crowd had mostly dispersed and the vineyard was blessedly quiet again, a familiar beat-up silver truck pulled into the driveway. Mr. Malcolm Dandridge stepped out, wearing a battered leather jacket and a smile so wide it could have split granite. He slapped a thick manila envelope onto the hood of my truck and said, "Time for round 2, son." Inside the envelope were copies of civil lawsuits, not just against Karen personally, but against the entire Ridgeview Homeowners Association. Every single board member who had signed one of her fake votes or helped circulate false documents was being named individually. Charges included harassment, criminal trespass, defamation, fraudulent fundraising, intentional infliction of emotional distress, attempted and lawful seizure of private property. And Dandridge wasn't playing small ball either. He was seeking punitive damages enough to hit their bank accounts so hard they'd feel it for years. I flipped through the documents, my hands steady for the first time in weeks. This was it, the real fight. Not just shoving Karen off my land, but ripping up her whole rotten empire from the roots. "We'll serve them at tonight's emergency whole meeting," Dandridge said, grinning like a shark who smelled blood. "Best part, public record. Press will eat it up." And eat it up they did. By nightfall, the story was exploding across local news. Videos of Karen getting cuffed at the reclamation ceremony were circulating online, racking up thousands of views. Memes popped up almost instantly. One had Karen's lemonade stand photoshopped into a medieval stockade, complete with a caption, "Community property, more like community service." Another meme showed a cartoon Karen being dragged away by a smiling grapevine. But the biggest blow came when reporters dug into Ridgeview HOA's finances. Turned out, the Save Our Vineyard fundraisers Karen had organized had raked in thousands, and nobody could account for where the money went. No project plans, no receipts, no escrow accounts. Just Karen and her cronies passing a cash jar around like it was a church collection plate at a rock concert. By the following week, half the Ridgeview board had resigned in disgrace, tripping over each other to escape the incoming lawsuits. The HOA's reputation, once bulletproof among the Silverstone Ridge community, lay in ruins, a smoking crater of arrogance, greed, and stupidity. Even the homeowners who had once blindly cheered Karen's crusade now turned on her with a viciousness born of embarrassment and betrayal. Angry letters flooded the Ridgeview office. Protest signs popped up on yards once proud to fly HOA banners. Free the Vineyard t-shirts started circulating at local shops. It was beautiful chaos, the kind of righteous vengeance that tastes better than the sweetest bottle of vintage wine. And through it all, the Callahan Vineyard stood strong, silent, and moved the last bastion of truth against a tide of delusion. But this wasn't just about vindication anymore. It was about restoration. It was about making sure no Karen, no HOA, no arrogant clipboard-wielding fool could ever threaten this land again. Victory tasted sweeter than any harvest we'd ever pulled from the Callahan vines. After weeks of lawsuits, news reports, and public humiliation raining down on the Ridgeview HOA, it was time to finally shift from defense to celebration. Not just for me, not even just for my family, but for every neighbor who realized too late how close we had come to losing a piece of Silverstone Ridge's soul. We decided to throw a real festival. The Callahan Vineyard's Heritage Celebration, a gathering to honor the legacy of the land, the sacrifices of the generations before us, and the stubbornness it took to protect what mattered. Flyers went up across every storefront, school, and post office within 20 miles. Live music from local bands, farm-to-table food stands, historical tours of the vineyard and old wine cellar, kids scavenger hunt through the vines, tasting tables lined with Callahan's best vintages. But the highlight, a giant, hand-painted sign stretched across the front gate, reading, "Private property since 1890 to protect it forever." The day of the festival dawned bright and clear, the autumn air crisp with just a hint of wood smoke. Families poured in, laughing and clapping their kids on the back as they raced toward the scavenger hunt booths. The vineyard rolled out like a dream under the wide blue sky, rows of golden green vines shimmering in the sunlight, the old sycamore tree standing proud like a sentry. For the first time in months, there were no drones buzzing overhead, no fake petitions, no clipboard warriors. Just community, real community built on trust, resilience, and a shared love for the land. My father, Eli, stood next to me by the old stone wall, arms crossed over his chest, a rare smile tugging at the corners of his weathered face. Jake wove through the crowd like a celebrity, tail wagging, soaking up all the belly rubs he could. At noon, I climbed up onto a makeshift wooden stage built from pallets and wine crates. The crowd quieted, all eyes on me. I swallowed hard, heart thudding against my ribs, and spoke. This vineyard isn't just rows of grapes and old stone. It's every dawn my great-grandfather woke before the sun to work these fields, every storm we weathered, every harvest we celebrated. Its roots deep ones, and no amount of noise or lies can pull them up. Thank you all for standing with us, for proving that truth, history, and stubborn grit still mean something. The applause rolled over me like a wave, warm and thundering. And just when I thought the day couldn't get any better, a black SUV pulled up beside the barn. Out stepped the agricultural commissioner himself, smiling broadly, holding a heavy bronze plaque in his hands. Before the entire crowd, he presented us with an official designation, State Historic Agricultural Landmark. Cheers erupted, louder than any I'd heard before. The plaque gleamed in the afternoon sun, but it wasn't just metal and words. It was a shield, a promise. A permanent line drawn in the rocky soil of Silverstone Ridge that no Karen, no HOA, and no army of fools could ever cross again. The Callahan Vineyard had survived, and it would stand for generations to come. The sun had begun to sink behind the mountains, casting the vineyard in golden hues as the celebration continued into the evening. The laughter, music, and the scent of freshly baked pies filled the air. Children chased each other through the rows of vines, while adults lingered near the tasting tables, exchanging stories and toasts under the warm light strung across the old barn. But as the evening deepened, a quiet sense of contentment settled in my chest. The battle was over, the land was secure, and it felt like the weight of the world had been lifted off my shoulders. That was until I overheard a conversation by the well. Two women, laughing low, talking in hushed tones about something that made me stop mid-step. They didn't notice me approach at first, but when they did, their voices dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. "I heard it's official," one said, grinning. "Karen's house sold this morning." My stomach churned, not out of concern, but out of sheer curiosity. "Karen, of all people, had somehow found a buyer for the house she had once proudly held up as a symbol of her community leadership. "Well, who would buy it?" the second woman asked. "It's only been on the market for a few weeks. The scandal's still fresh. Surely no one would want that mess." The first woman smirked. "You'd be surprised. I heard a local rescue organization bought it." "A rescue organization? Goat rescue," the woman clarified, barely holding back a laugh. "They're turning it into a rehabilitation center for rescued goats. They plan to let them roam the property, heal, and graze." Can you imagine? Karen's house is going to be filled with goats. The absurdity of it hit me like a lightning bolt. Karen, the woman who had tried to bulldoze our family's legacy, was now going to have her own house turned into a sanctuary for the very creatures she'd tried to push off our land. The karmic poetry of it was too perfect. I chuckled under my breath, my heart lightening with a sense of satisfaction that could only come from the universe's perfect sense of humor. The next day, after the festival had died down, I made a casual visit to the old farmhouse where Karen had once paraded around like she was some kind of monarch. The place was quiet now, the once grand porch sagging under its own history. As I stood there, staring up at the cracked windows, a car pulled up, a weathered station wagon, with a wooden sign nailed to the side that read Silverstone Goat Sanctuary. Out stepped a group of volunteers, unloading feed and supplies. The entire scene felt like some strange, cosmic joke. Karen's dream of turning our land into a community center had ended, and her home was now the very place where goats would graze, roam freely, and be loved. I had to laugh. Some roots run too deep to be uprooted. Karen had underestimated everything: my family's history, our resilience, and the simple, stubborn truth that no one can steal what was never theirs to begin with. But most of all, Karen had underestimated the beauty of the land she had tried to destroy, and in the end, it had come full circle. Her legacy was now tied to the creatures she had once thought beneath her, the very animals that would graze peacefully where her fantasies once stood. The final twist of fate was simple: Karen's house was now the goats' playground. And so, the Callahan Vineyard stood stronger than ever, not just as a vineyard, but as a testament to the enduring power of legacy, resilience, and the ability to rise from the ashes of greed and lies. The battle had been hard, it had tested everything we had, but in the end, we were victorious. The land was ours, and it always would be. And as for Karen, well, somewhere in the distance, a goat was probably nibbling on the very porch where she had once stood, declaring her false dreams of empire. Her reign had ended, and the goats, fittingly, had the last laugh. Lesson for the audience. This story is a reminder that roots run deeper than ambition. Karen's blind pursuit of power, driven by arrogance and entitlement, led her to underestimate not only the value of the land but also the resilience of the people who have lived and worked it for generations. She thought she could erase history with lies, flashy signs, and a misguided sense of entitlement. But the Callahan family proved that no amount of manipulation can overpower a legacy built on hard work, integrity, and love for the land. The story teaches us that truth, no matter how quiet or seemingly fragile, has an undeniable strength. It may be buried under lies or overshadowed by false narratives, but it always finds its way to the surface, eventually. Whether it's in a family farm, a community, or even within our personal lives, the truth is a powerful force that cannot be so easily destroyed. It also highlights the importance of standing up for what is right, even when it seems like the odds are against you. Luke didn't just passively let Karen's lies spread. He fought back with strategy, law, and unwavering belief that this legacy belonged to his family. His journey was not about confrontation alone, but about preserving something far greater than a piece of land. It was about protecting heritage, community, and the values that hold us together. In the end, the true strength of community and the power of standing by your principles shine through. Even when things look bleak, even when the system seems rigged against you, never underestimate the power of resilience, unity, and truth. No matter how loud the voices of greed and entitlement are, the quiet, stubborn persistence of the right cause will always find a way to triumph. And sometimes, the best kind of justice is the kind that comes with a touch of poetic karma. So, when faced with adversity, remember, stand firm, stay true, and let your roots remind the world what really matters.